The quiet I sought was not the silence of an empty room, but the deep, resonant quiet of a life well lived, of history soaked into the very soil. I had come home to find it. My name is Catherine Riley, though most people now know me as Kate, the newly elected district attorney of this sprawling, rural county. The campaign had been a brutal, 18-month slog, a world of pancake breakfasts, hostile debates, and endless fundraising calls. After the victory, all I wanted was to retreat, to build a sanctuary for myself and for the man who was the anchor of my life, my father, Frank. Dad was 93 years old, a man whose life story was written in the rings of the ancient oaks on his land. He was a third-generation rancher, though his ranch had, over the decades, shrunk from 1,000 acres to a final, defiant 10. This small parcel, with its 100-year-old barn, its modest farmhouse, and its small herd of heritage cattle, was the last remnant of a bygone era. It was also, by a quirk of modern development, completely surrounded by the manicured, upscale community of Riverwood Estates. I had bought a modern house on a lot that backed directly onto my father's land, creating a single, unified family property. The plan was for him to live in his beloved farmhouse, where my mother's memory still lingered in every room, while I lived next door, close enough to help him with the daily chores and to ensure he was safe. It was meant to be a perfect arrangement, a blending of the old world and the new. The new world, however, had an emissary, and she arrived on the first weekend. Her name was Meredith Blackwood, the president of the Riverwood Estates Homeowners Association. She didn't come to welcome me. She came to deliver an ultimatum. I was helping Dad mend a fence that separated his pasture from the HOA's pristine, unnaturally green common area when her golf cart whirred to a halt. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a face that seemed to be locked in a permanent state of disapproval, her expensive clothing clashing with the rustic reality of the ranch. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the sharp, clipped tones of someone who has never been told no. Her eyes scanned the scene with unconcealed disgust, the weathered barn, the contented-looking cows chewing their cud, the faint, earthy smell of the pasture. "I am Meredith Blackwood. I assume you're the new owner at 12 Meadow Lane." "I am Kate Riley," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "And this is my father, Frank. This is his property." Meredith's thin lips tightened. "That is the issue I am here to discuss. This situation is untenable. The presence of livestock, the dilapidated state of that barn, the general agricultural untidiness, it is all in flagrant violation of the Riverwood Estates covenants and our community's aesthetic standards. It is a blight, and it is severely impacting the property values of your neighbors." My father, a man of few words, spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Ma'am, my family has been ranching this land since before this county had a paved road. This ranch is not, and has never been, part of your association." Meredith let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like tearing silk, a legal technicality. "You are geographically within our community. Your blight affects us all. I am here to inform you that the board has voted. You have 90 days to remove the livestock and demolish the outbuildings. If you fail to comply, the HOA will be forced to take action to abate the nuisance." I stared at her, my mind, trained to dissect legal arguments, struggling to process the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of her position. She was a petty, suburban tyrant who had just threatened to demolish a 93-year-old man's historic home and livelihood. "Mrs. Blackwood," I said, my voice dangerously calm, the voice I usually reserved for cross-examining a particularly hostile witness. Let me be perfectly clear. You have no jurisdiction here. My father's property is legally and historically separate. Your covenants mean nothing on this side of the fence. Any attempt by you or anyone from your association to set foot on this property will be treated as criminal trespass. Any attempt to harm my father's animals or his home will be met with the full and unyielding force of the law. A flicker of something dark and furious passed through her eyes. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by a woman half her age in dirty jeans. The law, she sneered. You'll find that in Riverwood. I am the law. You have been warned. She spun her golf cart around and sped away, leaving a palpable tension in the air. I looked at my father. He was leaning heavily on a fence post, his breathing a little ragged. The confrontation had taken a toll on him. She can't do that. Can she? Katie, he asked, his voice small. I put a hand on his shoulder, my heart aching with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. No, Dad, I said, my voice a low promise. She can't. I had come to this place seeking peace, a quiet haven for my father's final years. But as I watched Meredith Blackwood's golf cart disappear, I knew that peace would not be given. It would have to be won. And the battle had just begun. Meredith Blackwood's opening salvo was a campaign of bureaucratic warfare, a relentless assault of paper and fines designed to bleed us of our patience and our resources. She could not legally touch my father's ranch, so she attacked me, using my home as a proxy. The first notice of violation arrived a week after our initial confrontation. It was a thick, creamy envelope delivered by a courier, a clear act of intimidation. The letter, signed by Meredith, declared that my property was in violation of bylaw 18 nuisance abatement. The nuisance, she had written, was the pervasive agricultural odor and the unsightly view of my father's pasture, both of which were allegedly impacting my neighbors' quiet enjoyment of their properties. The fine was an astonishing $1,000, with the threat of a further $1,000 for every week the nuisance was not abated. It was a legal absurdity. She was fining me for the existence of my father's legally separate property. It was a transparent attempt to use me as a lever to pry my father from his land. My response was measured and methodical. I was the district attorney, but in this matter, I was acting as a private citizen, a daughter protecting her father. I would not use the power of my office. Not yet. I would build a case, piece by piece, as any citizen would have to. I drafted a formal, legally precise letter to the entire Riverwood Estates HOA board. I did not get angry. I did not make threats. I simply laid out the facts. Dear board members, it began. I am in receipt of your notice of violation. Please be advised that the alleged nuisance originates from a property, parcel ID 77B, that is not under the jurisdiction of your association. My father's ranch predates the Riverwood Estates development by nearly a century, a fact that is clearly delineated on the official county plat map, a copy of which is attached for your review. As such, any attempt to levy fines against my property for activities on his is legally baseless and constitutes a form of harassment. I consider this matter closed. I sent the letter, along with the highlighted plat map, via certified mail. I wanted a legal record of delivery to every single board member. I was putting each of them on notice, making it impossible for them to later claim ignorance of Meredith's illegal actions. Her response was to double down. A second notice arrived, this time for my fence, the one separating my manicured lawn from my father's rustic pasture. It was a simple, sturdy wooden fence, which I had installed for safety. According to Meredith, it was a violation. It was not the approved ornamental aluminum fencing stipulated in the bylaws. The fine was $500. I sent a second letter, again polite, again factual, explaining that the fence was a necessary safety feature due to the presence of livestock on the adjacent, non-HOA property, and that a solid wooden fence was a far more practical and humane barrier for cattle than ornamental aluminum. The fines kept coming. I was fined for the unapproved lighting on my back patio, lights I had installed to illuminate the path to my father's house. I was fined for the excessive noise of my father's old rooster, which occasionally crowed at dawn. I was fined because one of my father's cows, Bessie, had the audacity to stand near the fence line, creating a visual disruption. With each notice, I repeated my process. I documented everything. I created a new file on my secure server at home, a file I labeled simply Blackwood. I scanned every letter, every photograph she sent, every certified mail receipt. I created a meticulous timeline, a detailed chronicle of her escalating campaign. My internal monologue was a constant legal analysis. Establish the pattern of harassment. Document the clear retaliatory nature of the fines. Each new notice is another brick in the wall of our future civil suit. She is proving our case for us. I paid none of the fines, instead responding to each with a formal letter rejecting the charge and reiterating the jurisdictional reality. After 2 months of this, the fines she had attempted to levy totaled over $10,000. I knew this was just the first phase. Meredith was building her own paper trail, a fraudulent case against us that she would use to justify her next, more aggressive move. A woman this determined, this blinded by greed, and a fanatical need for control, would not be stopped by letters. I knew she would escalate from paper to direct action. One evening, I sat with my father on his porch, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. He was quieter than usual, the constant stream of threatening letters having taken a toll on his spirit. "I don't understand people like her. Katie," he said, his voice heavy with a weary sadness. "This land, it's provided for our family for 100 years. To her, it's just a mess that needs to be cleaned up. She's not just a person. Dad," I said, my voice hard. "She's a criminal. And I'm a prosecutor. She thinks she's playing a game of neighborhood rules. She has no idea she's playing a game of criminal law. And in that game, I never lose." The transition from bureaucratic harassment to physical sabotage was a predictable and dangerous escalation. Meredith, frustrated by my legally sound refusal to bow to her paper threats, decided to take matters into her own hands. Her first act was a cowardly, deniable assault on the very boundary that defined our conflict. One morning, my father called me, his voice tight with a cold fury I hadn't heard in years. "Katie, you need to come see this." I walked over to his property and found him standing by the fence line that separated his pasture from the HOA common area. During the night, someone had taken a pair of bolt cutters and methodically, viciously, snipped through a 50-yard section of the wire fence. The wire was curled back. The posts were damaged. It was a deliberate act of destruction, designed to allow my father's small herd of cattle to wander out into the pristine, manicured lawns of Riverwood Estates. Luckily, Dad was an early riser and had discovered the damage before the cows had found the breach. But the intent was clear. This was Meredith's way of manufacturing a crisis. She wanted the cows to get out, to cause damage, to create a panic among the residents. She wanted to create a situation where she could declare them a public nuisance and justify her extreme actions. "She's trying to create an excuse to come onto my land," Dad said, his voice a low growl. "She wants to create a problem that she can then solve." That day, the daughter and me stepped back, and the district attorney took over. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was attempted criminal mischief and a clear conspiracy to commit further acts. I knew I had to secure the scene and gather evidence. My first call was not to a fence repair company. It was to the lead investigator in my own office, a sharp, tech-savvy man named Rick. "Rick." "It's Kate," I said, my voice all business. "I need a recommendation for a top-tier private security firm. I need a full, comprehensive surveillance package for a residential property. Overt and covert cameras, long-range audio, the works, and I need it installed by the end of the day." "Trouble at the new place, boss?" he asked. "You could say that," I replied. "I'm dealing with an escalating situation, and I need an unimpeachable evidentiary chain. I want every angle covered. I want a system that will provide footage so clear and a chain of custody so perfect that it will be a prosecutor's dream." By noon, a team of discreet professionals was at the property. They worked with stunning efficiency. They installed a series of high-resolution cameras, some visible as a clear deterrent, others concealed in birdhouses and landscape lighting. They installed sensitive, long-range microphones aimed at the fence line. The entire system was networked, feeding encrypted data to a secure server in my house, with a real-time backup to the cloud. I now had a digital perimeter, a silent, unblinking witness. While they worked, I put my own legal skills to use. I spent the afternoon in my home office, not dealing with county cases, but with my own. I drafted a formal trespass notice, using the public property records I had already pulled. I got the names and addresses of every member of the HOA board. I printed a formal notice for each of them, stating that any unauthorized entry onto my father's property, parcel ID 77B by them, or any agent acting on their behalf, would be prosecuted as criminal trespass. I had them delivered by a process server that same day. I was laying a legal trap, making it impossible for them to claim they were not aware of the property line. As the security team was finishing up, my father came over. He had spent the afternoon in his workshop. He was holding an old, framed photograph. It was a picture of him as a young man, standing with his father in front of the then newly built barn. "Your great-grandfather built this barn to last 200 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That woman, she sees a dilapidated building. I see this." He tapped the glass over the image of his father's proud, smiling face. That night, my new security system sent its first alert to my phone. It was a motion detection event at the damaged section of the fence. I pulled up the live feed. A single figure, dressed in dark clothing, was moving along the fence line on the HOA side. They were carrying a can of spray paint. I watched, my heart pounding, as they spray painted a single, crude word on one of my father's fence posts: demolish. The camera was too far away to get a clear image of the face, but the figure's build and the expensive-looking athletic shoes they wore were telling. I saved the video clip. I now had a direct, recorded link between the vandalism and the HOA's stated goal. Meredith was getting bolder, and in her boldness, she was getting sloppy. She thought she was operating in the shadows, leaving anonymous threats. She had no idea she was now the star of a meticulously documented criminal investigation. With the ranch now under a blanket of digital surveillance, direct acts of vandalism became too risky for Meredith. So she shifted her assault to the realm of psychological warfare. She launched a coordinated campaign of slander and social isolation, using the Riverwood Estates online forum and community newsletter to methodically poison our reputation and turn our neighbors against us. The newsletter, a glossy, self-important publication called the Riverwood Register, was her primary propaganda tool. In the issue that followed the fence-cutting incident, she wrote a long, ostensibly concerned article titled, "A Question of Safety and Sanitation." She didn't mention us by name, but her target was unmistakable. "It has come to the attention of the board," she wrote, her prose dripping with false concern, "that a neighboring agricultural property is posing a potential health and safety risk to our community. The presence of livestock so close to our homes raises concerns about potential water contamination, disease transmission, and the attraction of pests. Furthermore, the dilapidated state of the structures on this property presents a clear fire hazard that could endanger us all. The board is exploring all legal options to mitigate this pressing threat to our families and our investments." It was a masterful piece of fear-mongering. She had transformed my father's clean, well-maintained heritage ranch into a dangerous, disease-ridden slum. The comments on the online version of the article were a predictable firestorm of manufactured panic. "This is outrageous. I didn't pay $1 million for my home to live next to a feedlot. My children play in that common area. Is it safe? Thank you for being so proactive. Meredith, you have our full support to do whatever it takes." The social ostracism that followed was swift and brutal. The few polite nods we had been receiving from neighbors vanished completely. When I would walk from my house to my father's, I would see curtains twitching. People would physically turn their backs if we passed them on the road. We were no longer just the non-compliant new arrivals. We were a biohazard, a threat to their children's health. The most painful part was the effect it had on my father. He had lived on this land his entire life. He knew the families whose names were on the street signs. But the new residents of Riverwood Estates, the people who had replaced his old neighbors, now looked at him with a mixture of fear and contempt. He started spending more and more time inside, the joy he took in his land slowly being eroded by the hostility that now surrounded it. This was when I made a critical decision. I had to pierce the veil of her propaganda machine. I needed to understand the power dynamics of the board she controlled. I made a phone call to the lead investigator in my DA's office. "Rick," I said, "I need you to do something for me. Off the books. I need you to run a full, deep-dive public record search on Meredith Blackwood, her husband, and the other 4 members of the Riverwood HOA board. I'm looking for financial entanglements, corporate partnerships, anything that connects them to a company called Clearview Development. I'm building a case for a potential civil RICO suit, and I need to map the conspiracy." Rick, a man who loved a good puzzle, was intrigued. Civil RICO. Boss. That's the big guns. This HOA must be a real piece of work. "You have no idea," I said grimly. While Rick worked his magic, I decided to make a personal appeal to reason. I identified the board's treasurer, a man who, according to my initial research, seemed to be the most moderate member. I invited him to meet me for coffee in town, away from the prying eyes of Riverwood. He came, reluctantly. I laid out my case calmly and rationally. I showed him the deeds, the plat maps, the letters, the evidence of the vandalism. I explained that Meredith's actions were exposing the HOA and its board members personally to catastrophic legal liability. He listened, his face growing paler with each new piece of evidence. "I had no idea," he stammered. "Meredith told us you were being unreasonable, that you were a threat. She controls all the information." "She does," I said, "and she is leading you all off a cliff. I am giving you a chance to step back from the edge. Talk to the other board members. Show them this. You can vote to stop this now." He left the coffee shop looking shaken, but resolute. For a brief moment, I had a flicker of hope that reason might prevail. The hope was extinguished 2 days later when Rick's report landed on my desk. It was a bombshell. Meredith and 2 of the other 4 board members were all silent partners in an LLC that had a direct financial stake in the success of Clearview Development's next project. The treasurer I had spoken to, and 1 other woman, were the only 2 clean members. But the most damning discovery was that Clearview Development had made a substantial 6-figure payment to Meredith's LLC, an initial consulting fee that was contingent on the acquisition of my father's land. This was no longer just a civil matter. This was bribery. This was a criminal conspiracy. At that moment, I realized my appeal to the board treasurer had been a mistake. It had shown my hand. Meredith would now know that I was digging, that I was building a case. Her next move would be desperate. It would be designed to silence us, to remove us from the board entirely. The war was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Having failed to intimidate us with social pressure and legal threats, and now likely aware that I was investigating her corrupt dealings, Meredith's desperation drove her to weaponize the full power of the state. She began a systematic campaign of filing false reports with every conceivable government agency, hoping to find one that would cripple my father's ability to live on his land. The first official visit was from the State Department of Agriculture. 2 inspectors in crisp uniforms arrived to investigate a complaint of gross animal neglect and improper waste management. The complaint, they explained, alleged that my father's cattle were malnourished, living in unsanitary conditions, and that he was illegally dumping their manure into the nearby creek. The accusation was a vile assault on my father's life's work. He was a meticulous rancher, a practitioner of sustainable, small-scale farming long before it was fashionable. His animals were his pride. I met the inspectors and led them on a full tour of the property. They saw the small, clean barn, the well-fed, healthy-looking cattle, the carefully managed composting system for the manure, which my father used to fertilize his hayfield. They took water samples from the creek, which ran clear and clean. One of the inspectors, an older man with a kind, weathered face, turned to my father. "Sir," he said, with a deep respect in his voice, "this is one of the cleanest, most well-run small ranches I have seen in my 20 years on the job. These animals are in magnificent condition." He then looked at me, his eyes hard. "The complaint we received is a work of fiction. I'll be noting in my report that it was a malicious and fraudulent claim, and I'll be forwarding it to the department's enforcement division. Filing false reports like this is a serious offense." The second visit, a week later, was from the Environmental Protection Agency. A young, serious agent arrived to investigate a claim that my father's old, diesel-powered tractor was leaking toxic fluids into the watershed, and that he was using a banned, lead-based paint on his barn. Again, we went through the motions. I showed the agent the brand-new, eco-friendly electric tractor I had bought for my father a month ago. I showed him the receipts for the Zero VOC, environmentally safe paint we had used to touch up the barn trim. The old diesel tractor sat in the barn, unused for months, a clean drip pan underneath it. The EPA agent, like the agricultural inspectors before him, left angry at the waste of his time and promised to file a report on the malicious nature of the complaint. Each of these visits was a victory for us. Each official report from a state agency declaring the complaints to be baseless and malicious was another powerful piece of evidence for my own growing case file. Meredith, in her blind rage, was unwittingly creating a chorus of credible, official witnesses who could testify to her campaign of harassment. But her next move was the one I had been dreading. It was a deeply personal and cruel attack, designed to strike at the heart of our family and my own professional life. One evening, I received a call from my boss, the State Attorney General. His voice was grim. "Kate," he said, "I'm calling you as a courtesy, but this is going to have to become official. We received a formal ethics complaint against you today. It was filed by a citizen, a Mrs. Meredith Blackwood." My blood ran cold. "The complaint alleges," he continued, reading from a document, "that you are using your position as district attorney to intimidate and threaten the members of your local homeowners association. It claims you have used your access to state resources to conduct illegal surveillance on your neighbors, and that you are attempting to quash a legitimate investigation into your father for animal cruelty and environmental violations. It also alleges that you are financially exploiting your elderly father to prevent him from selling his property to a community-approved developer." It was a breathtakingly vicious move. She had taken every one of her own crimes and projected them onto me. She was accusing me of the very things she was doing, using the power of a formal ethics complaint to tie me up in an internal investigation, to damage my career, and to destroy my credibility. "Kate," my boss said, his voice softening slightly, "I know this is a load of crap, but a formal complaint has been filed. I have to open an investigation. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately." I sat in my office, the phone silent in my hand, a profound sense of dread washing over me. This was her masterstroke. She had found a way to neutralize me. I was a prosecutor, a public official. The mere accusation of impropriety was a stain that could never be fully washed away. She had successfully taken me off the board, and now, with me sidelined and my father alone, she would make her final, decisive move. The time for subtlety was over. The time for war was at hand. The final, direct threat was not a quiet act of vandalism or a carefully worded letter. It was a declaration of war, delivered in the most public and audacious way imaginable. Sidelined by the ethics complaint, my official power as district attorney temporarily stripped away. Meredith knew I was at my most vulnerable. She decided it was time to move in for the kill. She called an emergency meeting of the Riverwood Estates HOA. It was held at the community clubhouse, but I was not invited. I only learned of its purpose from the one board member who had become my secret ally, the treasurer, who was horrified by Meredith's escalating madness. He sent me a clandestine text message containing a single, chilling photograph of the meeting's agenda. The agenda had 3 items. Item 1, a final vote to declare my father's ranch a persistent and uncorrectable public nuisance under a rarely used clause in the HOA bylaws. Item 2, a vote to authorize the expenditure of up to $50,000 from the HOA's reserve fund for nuisance abatement services. Item 3, a vote to approve an exclusive contract with a pre-vetted abatement contractor to carry out the removal of the nuisance. It was all there, in black and white. She was getting the board to officially sanction her criminal plot. The treasurer's next text was even more chilling. It was a short audio clip he had surreptitiously recorded during the meeting. I listened, my blood turning to ice. It was Meredith's voice, filled with a cold, triumphant fury. "The vote passes, 4-1. The motion is carried. The abatement will take place this Saturday at 9:00 a.m. sharp. I have already spoken with the contractor. They will handle the demolition of the barn and outbuildings. I have also made arrangements with a local culling service. They are licensed hunters, and they will be on site to deal with the livestock. It will be handled quickly and humanely. The sheriff's department has been notified that we are conducting a community cleanup and to expect some noise. A cold dread gripped me. She wasn't just planning to tear down a barn. She was planning to slaughter my father's cattle. She was going to send a group of armed men onto his land to kill his animals. And she was lying to the sheriff's department to prevent them from intervening. This was her endgame. A swift, brutal, and irreversible act of destruction. This was the final piece of evidence I needed. This was no longer just harassment or corruption. This was a detailed, documented conspiracy to commit multiple violent felonies, aggravated animal cruelty, a first-degree felony in our state, felony destruction of property, and armed criminal trespass. The ethics complaint that had sidelined me now became my greatest weapon. As a public official under investigation, I was required to document any and all potential threats or attempts to influence my conduct. Meredith's plot was a direct, violent attack on my family, designed to intimidate me and force me to drop my opposition. I immediately called my own personal lawyer. Then, I made my second call. It was to Sheriff Thompson. "Sheriff," I said, my voice quiet and controlled. "It's Kate Riley. I am calling you not as the DA, but as a private citizen who is about to be the victim of a major, violent crime. The threat I warned you about is imminent. I have a recording of my HOA president, Meredith Blackwood, and the board, conspiring to invade my father's property with armed men, to kill his animals and demolish his home. The attack is scheduled for this Saturday at 9:00 a.m. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Are you serious?" "Kate." "I am dead serious," I said. "I am emailing you the audio file and the meeting agenda right now. This is a premeditated, organized criminal action. I am formally requesting a law enforcement response to prevent it." "You'll get it," the sheriff said, his voice now a hard, angry edge. "This goes beyond any HOA dispute I've ever seen. This is domestic terrorism. We'll set up a sting. My special response team will be in place. Let them make their move. We'll catch them all in the act." The trap was set. The final pieces were moving into place. I had spent months being the shield, deflecting her attacks. Now, with the full, righteous power of the law behind me, I was about to become the sword. I went to my father's house and told him what was coming. I did not tell him the details of the police response. I just told him to stay inside with me on Saturday morning, no matter what he heard. He looked at me, his old eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness, and nodded. "Whatever it takes. Katie," he said, "you protect our home." The climax arrived with the rising sun on Saturday morning. The air was cool and crisp, but it was thick with a palpable, electric tension. From my living room window, which had a clear view of my father's property line, I watched and I waited. My father sat in his old leather armchair, a silent, stoic sentinel. The security cameras were all active, their feeds displayed on a large monitor in my office, recording every angle, every detail, for the final, damning record. At 8:45, the convoy arrived. It was a scene of such surreal, suburban aggression that it would have been comical if it weren't so terrifying. A massive bulldozer on a flatbed truck rumbled down the street, followed by a procession of contractors' trucks and several large, jacked-up pickup trucks. They parked in the HOA common area, a staging ground for their planned invasion. Men began to emerge. There were construction workers in hard hats, and then there were the others. 4 men in camouflage gear, carrying high-powered hunting rifles, their faces grim and purposeful. This was the culling service. And at the head of this private army was Meredith Blackwood. She was dressed in practical boots and a jacket, a bullhorn in her hand, her face a mask of triumphant, righteous fury. She was a general, come to conquer a foreign land. She was flanked by the 3 board members who had voted with her. They assembled at the fence line, a small, heavily armed mob preparing to storm a 93-year-old man's home. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Meredith raised the bullhorn to her lips. Her amplified voice, tinny and distorted, echoed across the quiet morning. Frank Riley, you have been found in violation of the community covenants. Your property has been declared a public nuisance. We are here to enforce the board's decision to abate this nuisance. Comply and stand down. It was a declaration of war. On her signal, the 4 men with the rifles unslung their weapons and began to climb over the fence. The bulldozer roared to life on its flatbed, ready to be unloaded. This was the moment, the act, the final, irrevocable crime. Just as the first hunter's boot touched the top rail of my father's fence, the world erupted in a symphony of controlled, professional chaos. It did not start with a warning. It started with the concussive thump, thump, thump of flashbang grenades, tossed from unseen positions in the woods that bordered the common area. The brilliant, blinding flashes and deafening booms sent Meredith's entire posse into a state of stunned, disoriented panic. Before the echoes had faded, they were surrounded. Black-clad figures, moving with a silent, terrifying speed, emerged from the trees. They were the county sheriff's special response team, the SRT, in full tactical gear, helmets and body armor, their rifles held at the ready. Simultaneously, a fleet of marked and unmarked sheriff's vehicles, including a massive Bearcat armored vehicle, roared into the common area from both ends of the street, their sirens now screaming, cutting off all escape. The hunters, who moments before had been ready to kill defenseless animals, dropped their rifles as if they were red-hot, their hands shooting into the air. The construction workers dove for cover. Meredith and her board members stood frozen, their faces a comical mask of shock and terror. The side door of an unmarked black SUV that had glided to a halt in the middle of the scene opened, and I stepped out. I was not the quiet, harassed resident they knew. I was dressed in a sharp, dark business suit. A gold badge, signifying my office, was clipped to my belt. I was flanked by the uniformed and grim-faced Sheriff Thompson. The temporary administrative leave had been lifted the moment I had presented the evidence of the planned felony. I was the district attorney, and this was my operation. I took a bullhorn from a waiting deputy. My voice, calm, clear, and amplified, boomed across the field, carrying the full, cold weight of the law. Meredith Blackwood, I began, my eyes locking onto her terrified face. You and the members of this board, Robert Finch, Anna Chen, and Mark Peterson, are under arrest. Sheriff Thompson stepped forward, his own amplified voice taking over. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated animal cruelty, conspiracy to commit felony destruction of property, and armed criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. The SRT team moved in, efficiently and professionally, cuffing the entire board, the hunters, and the contractors. Meredith began to shriek, a wild, incoherent babble of protests and threats. I walked slowly toward her, stopping just a few feet away as a deputy secured her hands behind her back. You came to my father's home with guns, I said, my voice low and quiet now, for her ears alone. You came to kill his animals and tear down his house. You told me that in Riverwood. You were the law. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. Meredith, I am the law, and I will personally be prosecuting your case. I am going to send you to prison for a very, very long time. The resolution was a legal and social earthquake that permanently reshaped Riverwood Estates. The mass arrest, executed with the stunning precision of a tactical operation, became a statewide news story. The evidence I had compiled, including the crystal-clear security footage of the attempted invasion and the audio recording of the board meeting where they had planned it, was overwhelming and undeniable. Meredith Blackwood and the 3 board members who had conspired with her were denied bail. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a trial prosecuted by me, the very woman they had targeted, they all eventually accepted plea bargains. They were convicted of multiple felonies and received significant prison sentences. The hunters and the demolition contractor, in exchange for their testimony, received lesser charges. The civil lawsuits that followed bankrupted them all. Residents of Riverwood Estates, whose HOA dues had been illegally diverted to fund a criminal conspiracy, filed a class action suit. My father and I filed our own civil suit for harassment and damages. Meredith and her cronies lost everything: their homes, their assets, their reputations. The HOA itself was dissolved by a court order, its covenants declared unenforceable due to the board's rampant criminal activity. The community was freed from its tyrannical rule. In its place, the residents formed a new, voluntary neighborhood committee, focused on community events and cooperation rather than punitive enforcement. The developer, Clearview Development, was implicated in the conspiracy through financial records uncovered during the investigation. The company was hit with a massive fine, and its local operating licenses were revoked, effectively ending its presence in our county. For my father and me, the peace we had fought so hard for finally descended. The cloud of hostility that had surrounded us vanished, replaced by an outpouring of apologies and support from our neighbors, who were horrified to learn the truth. My father, no longer a pariah, was now a local hero, a symbol of resilience and quiet dignity. His ranch was safe, its future secure. My administrative leave was, of course, lifted, and the bogus ethics complaint was summarily dismissed. I returned to my job as district attorney with a renewed sense of purpose, my reputation not tarnished, but enhanced. I had proven that I would fight for the vulnerable, that I would stand against corruption, and that I would uphold the law, no matter the personal cost. Our lives returned to a state of quiet normalcy. My father worked his land, his spirit restored. I found my own peace, not in escaping the world, but in shaping it for the better. The silence I had sought was no longer the silence of retreat, but the strong, steady silence of justice, of a life secure, and of a home finally, and truly, at peace.